Cool. So I want this to be a discussion. So if you have questions, throw them in the chat, and then Chris will find a time and interrupt me, and then we can talk about whatever it is you guys want to talk about. What I'm going to present is my point of view. It's my observations over 12, 15 years of writing software. And so you might not agree with all of it. In fact, I'm sure there are probably some of you who will disagree with parts of it. So if you disagree with it, I encourage you to just let it sit with you and think about it and see if you can kind of see where I'm coming from and see if it makes sense. And if it doesn't, then throw something in the chat and let Chris know, and we can talk some more about it. I'm perfectly happy with being challenged. That's how we learn and grow. So this presentation really came out of three kind of things that I've seen and noticed. The first thing is that all problems are people problems. I think this was alluded to in the DSH video. I know some of you guys are going to say, well, I do this really technical stuff. I do 5G or spacecraft or something. But the reality is those problems get solved by people, right? And so you've got to find the right people. You've got to get them the right training. You got to get them all on the same page and working together. And so at the end of the day, even though there's a technical problem there, the underlying problem is really a people problem. And the second thing is something that Michael Radzawan mentioned the other day in a Twitter or LinkedIn post. And I was going to say this even before he said it, but it kind of drives home the point. There's more to creating software than simply writing code, right? I mean, all of us like being in the LabVIEW IDE and dropping nodes and wiring them up and all that stuff and scrolling through the Project Explorer. But there's this whole scaffolding around writing code of all the processes and tools and the way we think about it and talk about it and the other people on our team and the project management side of it. And then the last one is this idea that what we value and the way we think about writing code really do shape the results that we get. And so a lot of it's just in our head. And if we can kind of change the way that we think about writing code, we can often get different results. So that's really on that last point is kind of where this presentation is designed to sit. See my notes. This is aimed more at an individual level, but you can take these same concepts and apply them to a team, right? So what your team values also affects the way you code. So you can have the team level and then you have your individual level. Right? And, the title of this is called Be a Craftsperson, Not a Code and Fix Coder. Hopefully most of you guys know the term code and fix coder. So we all kind of exist as software developers on some kind of continuum, right? It's not like a binary, you're either a code and fix coder or a craftsperson, you're somewhere along there. And we all start out as code and fix coders at the very beginning, right? Because we don't really know what we're doing, right? We're just happy to make it work when we start out because we're not software engineers, right? Or we're engineers and scientists, right? And the boss gives you an oscilloscope and a copy of LabVIEW and says, here, take this measurement. You make it work and everything's great. And then you become the expert and you get better at projects and problems, right? And I call them code and fix coders because they're always fixing their code, right? They create something. They don't really understand what they're doing, but it kind of works. So they ship it out and then code comes back with a bug and they basically employ what I call the random hope strategy. They randomly change something and they hope it works, right? And then they ship it out again and it comes back again and it just keeps going through this cycle. And then maybe they finally do fix the bug, but then something somewhere else breaks and then it happens all over again. Right. And then at the other side, we can have a craftsperson who has put in some time and energy and effort and read a bunch of software engineering books and kind of understands the whole process. They have a defined process and they do testing and they do all these things. They have automation. And so, they don't ship a lot of bugs because they test stuff before they ship it out. And when they do get a bug that comes back, they've got the understanding to try to find the root cause and fix that. And they've got modular design, so changes in one place don't roll out. And they also have a unit test for regression testing. So when they fix something in one place, it doesn't break something somewhere else.
Hey, Sam.
Yes.
To be clear, can you identify whether code and fix versus craft person is assigning a mentality or an output?
Yes. So it's all about the mentality more than anything else. Is that clear?
I believe so.
Okay, cool. Yes, questions are welcome. So 2 things to notice about this. Number 1, it goes uphill, right? it's easy to be a code and fix coder, right? You don't have to invest any time or energy or effort. To be a craftsperson, you actually have to do some studying. You have to do some introspection and retrospection. You have to look at what you're doing in the process, right? And the other thing is there's no time axis here, right? So as Fab says, you can have 1 year of experience 20 times, right? So it definitely does take time to become a craftsperson, right? You can't start coding LabVIEW today and tomorrow, oh, I'm a craftsperson. That doesn't really work. But just because you've been coding for 20 years doesn't make you a craftsperson either. So to Chris's point, it's about the mindset, and really it's about what we value and the way we think about things. So you guys may have seen something like this before, right? The things you value influence the way you think and see the world, and that changes the way you talk about it and the words you use. And we'll come back to the words part later. Words really do have meaning. And then that influences your actions, right? You don't just randomly decide to do something. You decide to do it because some value somewhere, some thoughts that you had about it caused you to do that. And then if you repeat the action often enough, you form a habit, and that gets you a result, right? In this case, the results are writing code that's actually useful to your end users, right? And making money for yourself and the business, and everybody's happy. So the problem is oftentimes we get this idea that we can just start with actions, right? We just take this big action and that's suddenly going to change all our results. But there's really two problems with that. One is if you just do some action once, that doesn't really create a habit, right? And habits are what really create our results, not necessarily just doing something once. Which brings us to the second problem, which is this idea of cognitive dissonance, right? So if you look at the world one way and all of a sudden you do some action that's different, you don't even realize this, but subconsciously your brain notices there's a disconnect there, and your brain says, whoa, these two things don't match. We got to fix that. And often the easiest way to fix that is to revert back to the old actions, because you've already been doing those for years, they work, so you just revert back. And so then you never form the habits, you never get to the results stage. Right? So those are the two problems with starting with actions. What you really need to do is evaluate your thought, the way you think about the problem and what you value, and then it will trickle down and cause the different actions. Right? So you need to do the actions, they're important, but you need to do them for the right reason because your value system has actually changed. If you think about this, I assume most of you guys have probably read the Agile Manifesto or at least looked at it. It doesn't talk about actions. It doesn't say you should write unit tests or you should do this or you should do that. It says we have come to value, right? And then it lists things that they value, right? So they kind of got this. And if you value the things that the Agile Manifesto tells you to value, you eventually end up doing all the things that we associate with Agile, right? The incremental development and writing tests and all that. But you really need to change the values. I think we've all seen companies where people come in and sell them a bill of goods, right? And tell them that they need to be Agile. And they put this big Agile in front of their name and everything's great. And they pay the consultants a ton of money and they change all the actions. But upper level management, their values and thought processes are still the same, right? And that typically doesn't end well, right? And eventually teams end up going back to the way they were. So one of the best ways to illustrate this is to tell a story. And this is kind of a made up story, but it's based on some scenarios that I've seen. So there's this guy, Bob, and he has this problem, right? He works on LabVIEW projects, and every single project seems to run over. And what's happening is the company doesn't believe in testing, unit testing and integration testing as you go, but they have this really great suite of tests at the end, factory acceptance test, right? And so because this factory acceptance test, right, tests everything, this code has to be finished before you test it. You can't test just part of it, right? So Bob goes and writes all this code. Somebody circled values there. Cool. That wasn't me. Anyway, did I circle that? All right. I got distracted. Okay. Right. So the project runs over because they get to the end and they're testing the whole thing at once. And it takes them forever to find where the bugs are because they're looking through all the code instead of just tiny chunks of it. And then they also have the problem of sometimes they fix a bug in one spot and a bug shows up somewhere else, and they don't have really good regression testing to prevent that. Right? So it causes all kinds of problems and the project runs over. right? I'm sure you guys have seen this type of stuff happen, right? So Bob decides that he goes to VIWeek and he sees a presentation on unit testing, right, from Fab or somebody else, right? And he says, wow, this sounds like this might be able to help, right? Because I can test things as I go, right? So he focused on the action of, I need to write unit tests, right? So the next time he goes to give a quote to his boss, he puts in a separate line item for unit tests, right? And the boss looks at that and says, well, the last time we ran over budget and now you want more money to write unit tests, we're not going to do that. So he gets shot down, right? But Bob's smart. So the next time he puts in a quote, he says, I'll just inflate the number of hours that I put in, right? He still kind of views testing and writing code as two separate things, but he decides I'm going to lump them in together in the budget so that then I can get it approved. And it gets approved and it sneaks by the boss, right? And so one day Bob's writing code and he writes a chunk of code and he starts writing tests for it. And the boss comes along and says, well, what are you doing? Right? And Bob says, well, I'm writing tests to test the code that I wrote. And the boss is like, well, you already wrote the code. He's like, yeah. He's like, so the code's done? And Bob's kind of like, well, yeah. Boss is like, well, then stop working on that. We're not paying you to write tests. Right? So Bob gets thwarted again. Right? And Bob probably comes to the conclusion that, well, unit testing is this thing that sounds great and wonderful out there in theory, and all these people give presentations, but in the real world, it doesn't really work. Is that true? Obviously not, because I know most of you guys have probably seen presentations from Fab and James McNally and all these people who use unit testing and it works, right? So why does it work for some people and not others? And I think it has to do with values and the way Bob's thinking about the problem. So Bob valued getting code done and out the door, right, and shipping code, and that's good. But the problem is his definition of done didn't include the word tested, right? Testing was this afterthought that you do after you write all the code, right? And he had testing and writing code as two separate activities. So his initial estimate, he added it as a separate line item, right? And when his boss asked him, what are you doing? He didn't answer, I'm writing code. He said, I am testing, because he had separated those two things, right? And if he would have changed that mindset and his boss says, what are you doing? He says, I'm writing code. Oh, okay, carry on, right? And his boss probably wouldn't have even said anything. So just changing the way we think about things a little bit and what we value can really change the results that we get. So the next question you're probably asking is, well, what should I value? And I mentioned the Agile Manifesto. That's a good place to start. Here is what we at SAS value, and this is kind of what I've come to determine are things that really help us write good, high-quality software. The first thing is realizing that software quality is important, right? It's not just making it work, it's how you make it work, and it's the quality of all the stuff, the scaffolding that goes around your code, right? The quality of your testing and your requirements gathering and your software development lifecycle process and all this stuff, right? And the next thing is just long-term thinking, right? I feel like a lot of problems in our industry are made from people thinking very short-term. I just need to get code out the door, right? And writing code in a really quick, sloppy way may get code out the door faster. But the question is it the right code? And is it reliable and maintainable? And the answer is no, right? Incrementally delivering value, right? This comes from the Agile world of the idea that if we create a bunch of design documents or schedules and all this stuff, that's not really valuable to the customer, but software that actually does something, even if it doesn't do everything they need, that's valuable. So they shouldn't have to wait till the end, right? In the old waterfall model, customer doesn't really get any software until the very end. They get some design documents, they get updates on the progress, blah, 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 but they don't get anything they can actually use until the very end. Next one, continuous collaboration with the customer. So we kind of view our customers as partners, right? We're both trying to solve the same problem, and putting yourself on the same team as them is really helpful. I feel like a lot of software houses kind of have this antagonistic relationship with their customers, like we know better than the customers, or, they don't understand how this works or whatever, right? The other two are continuous learning and adapting to change. So continuous learning, part of it is about learning new technologies and learning new things, but a lot of it is adapting our process. So I think Brian and those guys mentioned the retrospectives and going back and looking at what you've done and what worked and what didn't, and trying to adapt as things move along. So, right, if the difference between a code and fixed person and a craftsperson is all in their head, how do we actually tell the difference, right? So say we're hiring somebody or we're going to farm out some LabVIEW work to somebody, right? We probably want to look for somebody who's more of a craftsman mindset than a code and fix mindset. And so there's a couple of ways we can do this. You can't see what's inside their head, but you can talk to them and see what words they use, and you can observe their behaviors and their habits. So if you were to go up to somebody who's a code and fix coder and you say, hey, how's the project coming? They might tell you what step of the waterfall method they're in. They might tell you, how much documentation they've produced, or, we wrote the requirements document or something like that. Or more than likely, they'll say we've written X% of the code or something like that. If you talk to a craftsperson, they're going to talk about what have I actually delivered to the customer that is working, running code? How many features have I implemented?
Hey, Sam.
And, when code and fix coders talk about working code, they just mean that it appears to work. I ran it once or twice. I put in some numbers and it seems good. So, we're going to ship it. Versus a craftsperson says, no, that's not good enough. It has to be tested. And the testing's kind of implied. Versus code and fix coders, testing's often an afterthought. They don't bother to test it until they find a bug or until somebody complains or somebody asks them. Maybe a manager says, well, how do I know this works? And then they're like, oh, well, let me write some tests to prove it. Same thing with quality, right? Code and fix coders, they're so concerned with going fast that they just churn something out that appears to work and they don't really think about how they're doing things, right? Craftsperson, it's kind of implied. It's like the code and fix coders running around really, really fast. They're more like the hare, right? And the craftsperson is more like the tortoise. It's slow, it's steady, right? But they're constantly moving forward, but they're moving forward very deliberately. And craftspeople also value speed, right? Because if they deliver something late, there's no real value in the business to that. But the other thing is, which I don't have on here, is like flexing, right? Code and fix coders, where they assign a deadline and they're like, we're going to get everything done by the deadline, right? And they try really, really hard, but they never make it. Craftsperson has this idea of, we've got a deadline, we got this set of features to do. And if they come up to the deadline, they would rather release a handful of features that are well tested and work than try to cram everything in and then have nothing work. Code and fix coders, these are the type of people that like to be locked in an office and you throw something over the wall to them and they go work on it and they don't talk to anybody, right? They're generally not very good team players. They're generally not collaborating with the customer, right? Craftsperson, they're constantly bringing the customer in to get feedback and to go back and forth with them. Code and fix coders really aren't that into learning. They'll learn something if they have to, if their boss tells them to, or if they need it for a specific project, but they're learning just enough to get by for that project. Excuse me. A craftsperson is more about continuous learning of new skills and technology and constantly building their toolbox. Code and fix coders are really set in their ways, right? They're always like, well, this is the way we do it. Well, why do you do it that way? And they never really know, right? Versus a craftsperson, they're always like, okay, well, we tried this, it didn't work. Let's try something else. What do you guys think will work, right? They're constantly trying to adapt. All right. Anybody see anything we should add to that list? Any comments?
Hey, Sam, we did have one question about lines of code. Are you using the NI definition of one node as a line of code?
This was way more theoretical, but yeah, probably. Okay. They would probably say, well, I wrote, I estimate the project's going to take 1,000 VIs and I've written 100, right? But you can see that that's just a metric that's not necessarily connected to anything as far as what the customer wants. And also, it's not really a great metric because you might have wrote the 100 easiest VIs and you left the 900 hard ones to be written yet, right? So that doesn't really add a lot of value. Does that kind of make sense? I don't know who had asked that, but anything else? Anybody? All right, doesn't look like it.
So Stefan says he misses design in this list.
Okay. So there's no design. Okay, well, I would think that like the craftsperson, when we say like quality implied, I think quality would be the quality of the design. But yes, a craftsperson is much more concerned about design because they're concerned about how the code does stuff versus just making it work, right? If you're just interested in making it work, you don't need to learn about factory pattern and all that stuff. You just wire stuff up. see Steve's comment. Okay. We are going to move on if you want to add to that. So this to me is like the epitome of code and fixer versus craftsperson. And I think this came up. Jason added, what's an example of a good progress update a craftsman would give? So a craftsman might say, we've delivered this percentage of the features. They might do, if they're doing agile, they might estimate their velocity and say, we think we can get this much done in that amount of time. Something like that. Yeah, delivering something useful. Steve said it perfectly. So this picture, right, I think in the commentary after the DSH workshop, somebody mentioned people running around like firefighters, putting out fires all the time, right? And I feel like that's what a lot of code and fixers do. And part of it is it's easy to do that because there's always something going on. And investing in becoming a craftsperson, right, requires energy and effort. But I view craftspeople more as the fire prevention people, right? So at some point, you're fighting fires, you got to get sick and tired of that, and you got to figure out what's going on. So like the analogy I have is like if your house is on fire, you should definitely put it out. But if your house continues to keep catching fire, maybe you should go investigate why it's catching fire and prevent that, right? So it's not that as a craftsperson, you don't ever put out fires, but you're trying to get to the root cause and figure out what's actually going on behind the scenes that's causing all the problems and fixing that. All right, so what are the benefits, right? Because it is energy and effort to become a craftsperson. Well, I think as a craftsperson, you spend less time solving technical problems, probably because you've invested the time and energy to create scripting tools to make you more productive. You've got a lot of automation going on. You've got a process in place, right? And all of that lets you spend more time solving the customer's problem. Because at the end of the day, right, the customer has a problem to solve, and they don't care how many lines of code you write. They don't care anything about that. They just want their problem solved in a way that's reliable and maintainable and all that stuff, right? So spending more time solving that problem is going to get you a lot further. And it's going to help you build better relationships with your clients because you're going to be talking to them and collaborating with them regularly. You're going to be on the same team with them, right? And they're getting something of value as things go. And the other benefit of this iterative thing, which I don't think I mentioned, is that, the 80-20 rule or whatever, but like, 20% of the value of features deliver 80% of the value, right? So if you get the important ones up out front, then that helps. And then those other ones just kind of fall away. At the end, they realize maybe they're not so important. We thought we wanted to do this, but not really. Easier adaptation to changing markets, right? I think this one's very pertinent, right? Because things are changing rapidly right now with the whole COVID thing. So being adaptable, right? Having that process of looking back on what you're doing and then changing and adapting as you go really helps with that. And because you have better testing, right? And you do a better quality job to begin with, you tend to have less rework, less time spent fixing bugs and chasing down bugs, right? That's not really fun work. I guess maybe some people really like the problem-solving aspect of that, but generally I find that's not really rewarding work anyway. So I'd rather be solving the customer's problem. So it's better for morale too. All right, so you might be saying, well, changing what I value, that's actually kind of difficult. How do I do this? The short answer is you can't do it alone, right? You can't just go off in a room by yourself and meditate and say, I want to value X, Y, Z, and suddenly you change. It doesn't really work that way. The first part is changing your identity, right? Looking at yourself not as somebody who just churns out lines of code, but somebody who thinks like a craftsman, somebody who values quality, values testing, right? It's not like self-talk in your head. But even that's not enough. You really need community, and you need to surround yourselves with other people who think the same way. And most of you guys are probably already on that track because you're here, right? So we have a really great and vibrant LabVIEW community. Not everybody in that community is a craftsperson, but I would say 90+% of them are, and the ones who actually participate regularly certainly are. So, surround yourself with those people, get in conversations with them. And the last step is really you need some personal relationships. You need people that, you can call up and talk to and ask for advice. And so my suggestion is to go to VIWeek whenever we're allowed to have those again, or go to a CLA summit or your local events or whatever. Meet a handful of people you like, invite them out to the bar, buy them a beer, and, get to know them, get to the point where you can call them up and ask them for advice. And I think that will be really, really useful. So we're approaching the end of this slideshow, and then I want to have a discussion. So how can we at SAS workshops help? I have my blog that I put out a lot of interesting articles on software engineering, on books I'm reading, on unit testing, a variety of stuff. Every even month, we have a software engineering webinar where we talk about some software engineering topic, and there's some discussion. We're putting together a series of online classes. So we're going to put one together for unit testing, introduction for beginners to unit testing. We're going to put one up on using Git and some other stuff. We have a mastermind group. So we have 7 or 8 people who get together twice a month. The first meeting, we go over some software engineering topic, then we go apply it and come back 2 weeks later and kind of share lessons learned and kind of help each other out. And then we have a private Slack group and some other stuff that goes on with that. We offer in-person workshops. Now, we don't really do that at the moment. We kind of split them up and made them Zoom classes, but we still have those. So we have one on unit testing and one on DQMH. And then we offer personalized coaching. And that can really be whatever you're looking for. It tends to be like code reviews, design reviews, pair programming, maybe helping you write some scripting tools to help out with some tasks that you do all the time, something like that. So that is pretty much the end of my presentation. I don't know what time it is. I don't have a clock. That took about half an hour. So who has questions? Who wants to comment? What does anybody think? What have I missed? I kind of just want to have a conversation about what properties you guys think are important in being a craftsperson. For example, those of you who might hire people, right? What do you look for when you go to hire somebody? What are some of the qualities, some questions that you might ask them? See, Brian's talking about source lines of code. Well, the other thing with source lines of code is, are they necessary? How to engage management. Certifications. Okay, so engaging management. I think that is probably one of the toughest parts. I don't know, does anybody have any recommendations on that? I mean, I think part of it is there's a disconnect between software engineers and management in that, management often sees software engineers as, oh, we got to do it this way, but we don't explain very well to them the business value of doing it better, right? Yes, ROI, Chris, perfect. There's a presentation, Mike Radzawan's on here and has that link handy if you could post that. If not, I'll post it later. It's JB Rainsberger talking about ROI and everything. And actually, let me see if I can put up a whiteboard and draw that. Is there a whiteboard feature here? All right, I'm going to butcher this. You guys should go watch his presentation. Can everyone see the whiteboard?
Yes.
Draw, cool. I want to draw a straight line. Oh, wow, that's really hard to draw a straight line. All right, so if this is time and this is cost, right? So
hey, Sam, I don't know if it's just me, but I'm not seeing anything on your whiteboard.
Anybody else seeing it? Yes, no?
No.
No?
No, Sam.
But you see the whiteboard, you just don't see what I'm drawing.
Yes.
Yeah, we can see the whiteboard, but we cannot see what you're drawing. Yeah.
Huh. Wow, okay. I don't know how that works. All right. Well, basically what happens is, if you take the code and fix approach, right? In the very beginning, when you start out your project, you add features really fast, right? So the graph is going to be, imagine a graph, x-axis is time, and the y-axis is cost per feature, right? So you end up with this exponential curve, right? Where at the very beginning, you're moving really, really fast. You're adding features quite rapidly, right? Because it doesn't cost a whole lot to add something on until you get to a point where now it starts to become almost vertical. Paint screen. All right. Let me see if Christian's paint screen idea works better. because I think a graph will help explain this. And I can do straight lines. Cool. All right, I hit the line tool like that. Not cool. So it looks something like that, right? This is the code and fix approach, right? Because at the beginning, can everybody see that?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Yes.
So this is the code and fix approach, right? So in the beginning, you're moving really fast, but then as the tech debt starts piling up, it gets harder and harder to make changes, right? Because you're building on a foundation of crap, pretty much. And I think of it as like the dirty dishes philosophy, right? You can take one dish and leave it in your sink. Okay, no big deal. But the longer you leave it there, the more it attracts friends. And next thing you know, you've got a whole mountain full of dirty dishes, right? And then it's a big pain to clean it up. Same way with tech debt, right? If you do something, tiny thing that's not quite right, that's okay. But then everybody else sees that and says, oh, these guys don't value quality. Why should I put in the extra work to clean this up? I'll just throw this more crap on top of it. Right? And eventually it compounds and it gets to be an exponential curve. If you take the time and do things right, you also get an exponential curve, but it's a much more gradual curve, right? It does rise at the end, right? As the project goes on and gets more and more complicated, it does get harder to add new features, but it's a lot closer to linear, right? But in the beginning, the problem is in the beginning, it looks like you're going slower, right? Because it takes you longer to add features because you're building the foundation first. Now, the interesting thing that JB Rainsberger said that caught my attention is that there is a point where the area under those two curves is equal, right? There is some time, T0, whatever it is, where the cost of doing it one way and the cost of doing it the other way are equal, right? The problem is we don't know when or where that T0 happens, right? So the way to explain it to your management is your management is betting that the project will finish before you hit that T0, right? And if you've got a project that you know is only going to last a week and it's just some dirty little thing that you're going to put together and throw away, like for example, in the LabVIEW world, if you're a grad student who's doing a project, right, and he's literally like you're the only one who's ever going to see it and you're going to run it once, do you really need to employ software engineering? Probably not, right? It's overkill, right? They're finishing their project long before they hit T0. But the problem for us is most of the stuff that we write is maintained for 20, 40 years. I used to work in the nuclear power plant industry. They maintain stuff for 50 years, right? I guarantee you that T0 is going to occur before 50 years, to the point where at some point you're going to want to add a feature to this and you're not going to be able to. So does that answer the question a little bit about conveying to management? I think you need to like draw a graph like this and just show it to them and be like, this is what's going on. The other great line in that presentation is it's something like, the manager, you're refactoring or something. The manager asks you like, well, why are you refactoring, right? And the initial thing is that there's some kind of like butting heads there, right? Like refactoring doesn't meet the business value. But in reality, it does, right? Because refactoring is going to allow us to be able to add more features cheaper later, right? But we kind of have this disconnect trying to talk to them. So the thing he suggests is this phrase, and it's something like, why are you refactoring? Well, I don't understand the problem. All I'm really doing is minimizing the incremental cost of features, right? So you're basically just making it easier for them to add more features later, right? And if you can explain that to them in words that they understand, and that's why he suggests those words, because they're like business words that business people understand, as opposed to like, oh, it'll just make stuff easy, make it easier for us to add features later. Well, they don't care about how easy it is to you, right? They care about cost, right? So when you say the incremental cost of features, then you're speaking their language, right? And I feel like too, sometimes as software engineers, we have this responsibility that when we want to change something to make it better, we have to present a business case, because otherwise we get viewed as like the whiny kids who are like, well, I don't like the way this looks. I just want to change it just to change it, right? And that doesn't really go over well. But if you can connect it to some business value, then that helps a lot. Does that kind of answer your question, Becky? I do not have the chat window up.
Becky says yes.
Okay, cool. Other questions. So that was one question. Let me make sure I didn't miss anybody else's.
We have a whole thread going on the importance of CLA certification if you'd like to weigh in.
It's a piece of paper. I have seen CLAs that write really crap code, and I have seen people who have no certification write really great code. I think if you're a hiring manager for a business and you don't have much to go on, that's probably a good thing. But I would rather have them in and have them code. Like, ideally, I would have them in and have them code with your team for like a day or two to see, like, do they get along with your team? Are they willing to adapt into your processes? Right? I mean, I don't know how feasible that is. I don't do a lot of hiring, unfortunately. But I mean, if you can do that, I think that's probably the best way to do it. Because it's not just coding ability too, right? It's all that being a nice team player and all those things. And I feel like we often hire for things that we can train, right? So we hire the person who's a really good LabVIEW coder. Well, I can take somebody who's a mediocre LabVIEw coder and send them to a bunch of NI classes and make them into a better LabVIEw coder. I can teach them all the stuff that I know. What I can't teach them how to do is how to get along well with others and, and be humble and all these other things. First thoughts about technical wealth. I need to go read that article. Fab, I have not read that. Or if I have, it's been a while. What else? Yes, exactly. Michael Lacasse said it perfectly. I mean, my thought process is I think CLAs are great just because I think the knowledge that you need to pass the test, right? You need to have some idea of architectures and stuff like that. So I think the knowledge is good. The actual piece of paper is less important. I mean, I would expect that anybody that I would hire who's been here for a while, that they would be able to pass the test at some point, but I don't think that's necessarily a prerequisite. But yes, I do agree with Sam Sharp too, that actually taking the time to take the test shows that you actually care. I think that's good. And Steve's point on showing code, I think that's also a good one. 40-hour trial, Fab says, I think that's a very good idea as well. That kind of goes along with my idea of, bringing them on for a few days and let them do that. Personality types. Zero to CLA in 18 months. Yes, that's rather quick. All right, who else has other comments that are not CLA related? Chris, I would say your comment about the CLD being more relevant is probably not as controversial as you think. You actually have to write code that works. If you want to become a craftsperson, but you're not, how'd you go about getting there? I want to say I have a blog post article on that somewhere. I'll have to see if I can dig that up and post that in the chat afterwards. Part of it is, I think, coming to events like this, right? Just getting your brain thinking about all these things that maybe you weren't thinking about before, right? Because when you're not a craftsperson, you're not thinking as much about reliability and maintainability and all the scaffolding around it. So I think that's the first step, is just realizing that there's more to code than just writing code. The next step is doing some research. So that could be reading books. It could be going to presentations, right? Trying to learn a little bit better. Those would be my recommendations. And I always tell people, you can't go from being a code and fix coder to a craftsperson in one day. So my goal, I always tell people, is do better today than you did yesterday, right? So look at what you did yesterday, identify some things that you're like, okay, yeah, I did that, but that's probably not the greatest idea. I should do things a little bit differently. And then just every day try to do that incremental improvement, and eventually you'll get there. Hopefully that answers your question. The Mastermind Group. It is private. It's a paid thing. We talk a little bit about business, but mostly it's software development practices and around teams and organizing teams and those type of things. So it's more technical, but it kind of hits on both. We do talk a little bit about business. So like several of the people in there are like consultants. So we talk a little bit about that. But then again, several of the other people in there work in really big companies. So it's kind of hard to have too many business discussions there. We do talk about things like we were just talking about how to convey to management the value of what we're doing, right? Because I think no matter where you are, you fight that problem. Other questions? If we go back to list of values, what values do you think we're missing? Is there anything that you don't see there? Christian, as a related question, how do you evaluate your progress improvement in a small team when you don't have more experienced people locally? So first thing I'd say about evaluating your progress, don't get into comparing yourself with other people. That would be my first thing, right? So compare yourself with how you were yesterday or last week or last month, right? So you're looking back at how did I do things then and how am I doing them now? And the key for me, I mean, I like the DSH guys. They always talk about being pragmatic, right? To me, the what I always ask people is, how is that working, right? They're doing something, right? And I look at it, I'm like, yeah, that's obviously not going to work very well. But I don't tell them that. I ask them, how is that working for you? Are you getting the results that you want, right? And if you're not getting the results that you want, then that's a sure sign that, hey, maybe I should change what I'm doing a little bit, right? So that can kind of point you, right? As you start to get better results, then you know that, okay, I'm moving along the path, right? So like, as an example, when you first start out, you might ship code and you might get a lot of bug reports back. Well, if you monitor the number of bug reports, when you do your next release, you should get less, right? And as you go on, you should notice less. And that's kind of a sign that, hey, I'm doing something right. Yeah, Fabiola's thing too, hire people to do architecture reviews. That was something that for me personally, when I worked at Westinghouse, this big company, I worked with other people and I had people to review my ideas. And working by myself, I totally lost that. And I would say that's a huge thing, is to get someone else to look at it, because they will see things that you've missed. Yeah, there's a lot of options for that. So all right, let me address Christian's question first, and I'll get back to Brian. Find some metric and then repeatedly check those values. Yes, I think you should look at metrics, but I would avoid looking at just one metric. And I would be honest with yourself about if you're gaming the system, right? Because when a metric becomes the target, right, then it loses all relevance, right? So for example, if your metric was 100% code coverage, you could write a bunch of really crappy tests that covered all your code, but that's not really what you want, right? So just have some metrics that you look at, but just kind of keep in mind that the metrics are not the goal. All right, so Brian asked about delivering value. So the best answer I have to that question is there's a book by Ron Jeffries, and it's called The Nature of Software Development. It's a tiny little book. It's by Pragmatic Bookshelf. It has a section in there on value. Right, so you could say value is money. Okay, like, hey, we can sell this feature. That's true. But sometimes value is information, right? We just want to get this out there fast so that we can get it to the customer and see what their feedback is. And then it helps us decide what to do. So there's different definitions of value, and it depends on the circumstance. So there's a whole chapter in here on value and what it is. So I highly recommend looking at that book. Yeah. And also value might be maintainability, right? And value could mean a bunch of different things. If you're doing something that you're deploying to a bunch of servers, maybe value is cutting down the number of AWS servers we need. That might be real business value. I like Steve's things. If you apologize for your block diagram when you show it, or do you feel proud of what you produce, right? That's a good way to look at it. Although there is the whole Dunning-Kruger effect where, you think you're doing a really good job when you're really not, but that is a whole separate discussion. Other questions, comments? What am I missing from this list of values here? Anybody notice anything obvious? Along with Steve's comment, I would say, like, when you look at really old code, you should cringe a lot. And then as you get further along, you look at stuff from like a year ago, you should cringe a lot less. That's like another good indicator that, like, okay, as I look at my old code, I start cringing less and less. That's probably a sign you're moving in the right direction. What are the biggest challenges people face, I guess, then might be a question. Instead of, like, I know, I think it was Becky who mentioned management, right? Convincing management that, it's worthwhile to invest in these things. Here's a question for people. Do you feel that it's your responsibility as a developer to develop yourself, or is it your employer's responsibility? That might generate some conversation. So Quentin says management's focus is on metrics like source lines of code. Yeah, and I think that becomes the thing where I was talking about where the metric becomes a target. It's no longer a good metric. Yeah, I think I fall under Christian and or Chris's, right? It's kind of your responsibility and you should take charge of it. But if your boss wants to help out and pay, that's a good idea. I mean, I think personally as a manager, I would want my people to be developed, but I would also want them to be self-starters, right? And be interested in learning anyway. I mean, I think as a manager, if you say you want people who value self-learning and then you work them to death and don't give them any time to actually do that, I think that's a problem. Yes, I think basically the consensus is somewhere in line with where I am, that you have to want to learn, but it's up, the employer should give you the opportunity, right, and help you out. That's good. All right, who else has questions? I didn't realize this was going to end so quick. I should have come up with a list of questions. So I have a question. What do you guys think about my story about Bob? Is that relatable or is that too significant personal developments as a developer? I would say I did a project where I decided I wanted to learn Active Framework, and it happened to fit the project really well. And so I went from not knowing the Active Framework at all to learning the Active Framework during this project. I'd say that was a personal development as far as like technical skills. As far as personal development in like terms of personal skills, I don't know. I got to think about that one. Will there be a place with all the recordings from VIWeek? Yes, there should be a place. I'm not sure where that will be. If you're on my mailing list and you signed up for this, I will send you a copy of the video. So, all right, I think I'm just going to call this if there are no more questions. And we can keep up the conversation in the Discord chat. Any last minute questions? Future independent contractor. Yeah, I hope you guys found this useful. Yes, thanks.
I think I speak for everyone when I say thanks, Sam.
Okay, all right. Well, it's well received, Chris. Enjoy the rest of your day. Enjoy the rest of the stuff. Oh, I should mention, I have another talk on Friday. It is way more technical, but it's about using mock objects for testing. So if you're into unit testing, you should come check it out for sure. If you're not, maybe it'll convince you to get into unit testing. So, all right, thanks.